Good morning, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to listen and learn a little bit about the resources that the Department of Justice has developed. When people think about the Department of Justice, usually they think about prosecutions and investigations, and that's certainly a lot of what the department does. But in addition to that, the department has invested a lot of time and resources developing information, training, tools, and resources for state and local elder justice professionals, including prosecutors, law enforcement, victim specialists, and others. Basically, anyone who, in their professional capacity, interfaces with older adults and may be interfacing with potential victims of elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. All of our resources that we develop are on our website, which is www.elderjustice.gov. I'm not sure it's a philosophy, but our belief is that it's no good if it just sits on the shelf somewhere. We really try to develop tools that we're told that people can use and need, and try to make those as widely available. So what I'm going to do today is just highlight some of the resources that are available. I encourage you, if you have the time or inclination, to hop on the website and just tool around. There's a ton of really helpful information on there, but I just want to highlight some of the things in today's webinar. So, in terms of the initiative, as I mentioned before, part of our responsibility at the Elder Justice Initiative is to help coordinate the department's nursing home efforts, and those are typically cases against nursing homes that are providing grossly substandard care. So the Elder Justice Initiative in Washington, D.C. helps to coordinate all the cases nationwide against underperforming nursing homes. But in addition to that, we have a strong programmatic side in trying to develop these resources that I mentioned before, all of which are on the website. So if you go to the elderjustice.gov website, this is the one of the first screens you'll see. And you'll see on the left-hand side the large buckets of materials that we have. Rural and tribal resources, materials regarding financial exploitation, and then materials and training for various groups, including prosecutors, law enforcement, victim specialists, and others. And so what I'm going to do today is sort of delve into this left nav a little bit and show you some of the stuff that is inside. So, as Aaron mentioned, an area of focus for the department has been on combating elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation in rural and tribal areas. We decided maybe 2 years ago that while there were it appeared that there were academic centers and others in urban areas that have been developing resources for elder justice professionals, there was not the same amount of attention that had been paid in rural areas. And the problem is, as you are all well aware, there are unique challenges of providing services in rural areas. And so we wanted to get a better understanding of what those were and sort of what we could do to assist. And so a couple of years ago, we held the first Rural and Tribal Elder Justice Summit in Des Moines, Iowa. And the hope there was to learn more about the challenges that rural communities were facing in combating elder abuse, highlighting available resources, and also highlighting sort of what projects were in the pipeline. So one thing I would flag is on the Elder Justice website, we developed this resource guide. This is a massive document, and this took over 8 months to put together. But what we wanted to do was create a document that would have links to all the resources that we could find, the best resources that we could find for different types of elder justice professionals. So, for example, among the different pages on there are resources for adult protective services, for elder justice professionals, civil legal aid. There are over 15 to 16 different types of elder justice professionals, and what we did was we scoured different websites within the federal government and outside the federal government and just pulled together whatever we could in terms of good training or information or webinars or resources. So first of all, we have all these professional resources. But in addition to that, we wanted people to be aware of what information and resources were available at different federal agencies. And so we worked with over 20 different federal agencies and asked them, what materials do you have that might be of assistance to elder justice professionals in rural and tribal communities? And there was a ton. And so working with those 20, they identified all their materials and webinars and everything, and those are all accessible through this document. I would also say, before going on to the next step, that we really wanted to highlight available resources and grants in a few different areas, including telecommunications. Obviously, Wi-Fi access is huge, and so we wanted to highlight available grants and opportunities to support broadband access in rural communities, health, housing, all those different types of areas. We had worked with the various federal agencies to put in one place what was out there. So again, that was our effort to try to make it a one-stop shop for professionals who may not know what's available. Given the fact that we're at the Department of Justice, obviously a big area of focus for us is supporting state and local law enforcement and their efforts. And so what we did was we developed this Elder Abuse Guide for Law Enforcement, or EAGLE. And this is really becoming a one-stop shop for law enforcement in terms of information. As you can see, we have checklists for first responders in terms of things that they should be looking for, evidence collection, community resources. This is a free online tool that is available to all law enforcement nationwide. And we're trying to get this incorporated into the state law enforcement training academies and the like. In addition to EAGLE, we are working with the National White Collar Crime Center, which is a terrific centralized hub for law enforcement training, and incorporating all of our elder abuse training into their broader training for law enforcement. In addition, we had heard from law enforcement mostly that it's often they have many training requirements, and they're busy and they have lots of other responsibilities. So we wanted to find what was the best way to communicate information to them, highlighting elder abuse or financial exploitation. And what they told us was the fact that a lot of the most helpful information they get is during their daily roll calls at the precinct or at the department. And so we worked with an organization to help develop a whole series of roll call videos to help train and help them identify sort of what things they may be seeing in their communities. And all of these are also accessible on the Elder Justice website. Another example of a tool that we developed is SAFTA, the Senior Abuse Financial Tracking and Accounting Tool. What we heard was that oftentimes, even if they hear about an allegation of fraud or financial exploitation, they're not accountants. They're not trained in putting together the financial records or information in a way that may be compelling to a prosecutor to take the case. And so we worked with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, as well as some forensic accountants, to develop this tool, which is, I don't know how to describe it, but to say it's basically like TurboTax for financial fraud documentation. We tried to make it as simple as possible in order to identify what types of information they need and to provide an easy interface for the user to help enter the data in a way that would generate charts like the ones you see here that would show a trend or show aberrant behavior or show potential fraud that they can then take to a prosecutor in order to persuade them to potentially pursue and prosecute a case. For prosecutors, again, unsurprisingly, this is another area that the Department of Justice supports. We also pulled together a bunch of different resources. For the upper left-hand corner, you see a video series. And to describe that briefly, there are certain live trainings that are available for elder abuse prosecutors, but it's expensive to get them to the training, or it's expensive to have the trainers come to them, and it's hard to carve out a day or two or three to do that type of training. So we worked with a number of elder abuse prosecutors around the country to develop this video series where it distills the key elements of an elder abuse or elder fraud prosecution from the very beginning to the end, from how to investigate, how to work with your local community, how to work with adult protective services, how to identify and then work with subject matter experts, to how to put together a financial fraud case, how to actually litigate, what are the defenses that defendants oftentimes raise in these prosecutions. So we work with them to develop this series. So for those who are unable to participate in any type of live training, we wanted to give them at least something that they can use to sort of orient themselves and get a sense of how to begin and how to investigate these types of difficult cases. As an aside, I wanted to mention, and I don't know if you knew this, but a couple of years ago, Congress passed the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act. This was a pretty big deal in the elder justice field, and one of the things that this act required was for each U.S. Attorney's Office, again, every state has at least one U.S. Attorney's Office, and they're the primary federal prosecutors in that district. Some districts like California may have four different U.S. Attorney's Offices. But what the act required was that for each U.S. Attorney's Office, they would appoint one Elder Justice Coordinator. And the Elder Justice Coordinator was responsible for helping to be a resource to that community on elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation, also to help coordinate law enforcement efforts. And so again, to the extent that you would like to know who your Elder Justice Coordinator is in your district, feel free to give me a call or to shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to identify who that person is. Again, we really hope that these EJCs, these coordinators, are both a way to convey information on resources that are available, but also to listen and to learn more about what's happening in the community and what issues that they may need to focus on. Another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit are multidisciplinary teams, or MDTs. Multidisciplinary teams, as the name suggests, are teams that are comprised of different specialists, including, it could be prosecutors, law enforcement, it could be clinicians, it could be academics, it could be adult protective services or long-term care ombudsmen. It's basically teams with multiple disciplines working together to try to either triage elder abuse cases or to figure out how to best protect the interests of potential older adults that may be victimized. And so these are important groups and teams that are supporting elder abuse victims across the country. And so we wanted to provide a resource to those communities that were interested in either creating an MDT or improving their MDT. And so we put together our Technical Assistance Center, which is free of charge. And so to the extent that people want to consult with us, and learn more about these MDTs and how they can start it or how they can improve it, we want to provide that resource to them. As part of that, we recently released this MBT Map. And we wanted to basically show across the country where these different types of teams were. Again, there are many, many, many different types of teams that focus on different aspects of elder abuse. Some really focus just on physical abuse, others focus on financial abuse. And so we thought that it would be helpful for the community to know if they have these organizations in their backyard in case they need to reach out to them. So this map is an easy way to do that. We, again, just launched this last month, and I think we are hoping to hit the 300 mark of teams in the next month or so. But again, we suspect that this is just a fraction of the ones that are really out there. And so our goal is to try to get the word out that we have this resource and invite as many elder abuse teams and multidisciplinary teams to join and have their team identified on our map. Another part of our objective is to raise public awareness about different forms of elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. So if you go on our website, there is just a ton of stuff that you can download. There are PowerPoint presentations, there are brochures, There are presenters guides to the extent that you want to host a meeting and talk about elder abuse or financial exploitation or something like that. We've created PowerPoint presentation with presenters' notes. So you can just take it off the shelf and go from there. We have handouts, as I mentioned before. We really want to create as many tools and resources that people could just use today or tomorrow if they want to do it. It's all really there for you. In addition, one other thing we have is we've created these flyers that are state by state. We appreciate that people want to know what resources are available to them in their state, who they can call. So we created these flyers that are tailored to every state in the District of Columbia. So to the extent that you are interested in holding an event and you want to hand out a flyer of Kansas materials, we have one for Kansas and basically every other state that has links to the numbers of organizations within your state. Again, these are just some more of the different types of community outreach materials that are available on the Elder Justice website. Something else I want to highlight as an example of a tool is, and I don't know how familiar you guys are, but there are court-appointed guardians and conservators. These are people who are appointed by a court to the extent that an individual may have difficulty making decisions or may have cognitive issues. And we have found recently, well, maybe even not so recently, that guardianship and conservatorship is a pretty heavy-handed option. It's really meant for those that really cannot make decisions for themselves at all. But there are less intrusive options out there of supports that are available for people who might need a little help making decisions. Rather than taking away their autonomy or decision-making power altogether, there are options out there. And so we work with the National Center for State Courts in order to develop an online tool, a course, a training that helps to walk people through what their options are to help family members and older adults or people with disabilities or anyone to understand that when they're in a situation like this, what are the options and what is the best fit for me? It may be that at some point I may need to have a guardian appointed, but that given my situation right now, I may not need it. There may be less intrusive options. And so we want to make that information available to the public and help people to make the best choices for them and their families in terms of what is the best choice. Obviously, an important part of our objective is to make sure that people know what resources are available to them locally and where to go if they are victims of abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation. So again, this is a page on our website that identifies some of the numbers and resources that are available to people. Obviously, if someone is experiencing immediate abuse or something live, 911 should be called immediately. But for non-life-threatening emergencies, there are other victim hotlines that they can call to identify potentially available help or services nearby. On that regard, we also developed a resource in terms of finding help near you. And so on the website, you choose your state. It will identify the number of these different types of state and local organizations that are there to support victims and their families, ranging from aging and disability resource centers to legal aid to counseling to crime victim compensation. We try to pull all that information in one place so people can try to identify those numbers as easily as possible. So for example, if you type legal aid or click legal aid, this is what would show up, a hotline number as well as an email or a web address if there is one. Along the lines of trying to develop tools for older adults or their families, we created this Elder Abuse Resource Roadmap, which is a horribly long name. But what we did was we worked with over a dozen federal agencies to develop a series of questions that will help direct people to the right federal agency if they want to make a report about some sort of fraud. So the roadmap will take you to where you need to go within 3 to 4 clicks at the most. So depending upon if the person who perpetrated the fraud was a stranger or someone to trust, you would click one of these buttons and then it would take you to another page which would ask whether or not to get more information about the type of fraud or type of financial exploitation the victim experienced, and then it would eventually take them to the relevant federal agency. For example, to the extent that the questions led you to the SEC, this is what would show up on the right-hand side. It would tell you a little bit about the SEC. It would provide a link to where you can file a complaint with the SEC. It describes a little bit about what happens after that, as well as identify other resources that are available. We are looking to update this further, but again, at this point, there are over a dozen different types of fraud schemes that can be linked to on the roadmap, and it will help them identify sort of potential resources. Sneak peek. So that is a fairly high-level whirlwind tour of some of the resources that are currently available on the Elder Justice website. But looking ahead, I want to highlight a couple things that we're doing. One is that it's always good to do assessments to understand what the needs are out there in the community. And so we have begun the process of putting together a national needs assessment to get a better sense of what elder justice professionals or older adults or their family members think would be helpful to them in terms of elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. In addition to that, there's another project that we're quite excited about, which is the Enhanced AIM Judicial Review Tool. What this is meant to do is to help judges. As I mentioned before, there are judges now who are oftentimes being asked to assess the mental capability or capacity of older adults in order to make decisions, like, for example, whether or not to appoint a conservator, or whether or not to appoint a guardian, or whether or not someone can testify. But the problem is that judges oftentimes do not have the relevant background to know what are the right considerations. What type of experts are qualified to opine on mental capacity, on whether or not a person can make a financial decision? What type of studies are out there? What type of information should he or she be asking for as a judge in order to help assess these types of questions for older adults who may have cognitive issues? And so we are working with experts to help develop a tool that we can share with judges to help provide them with at least some guidance, a roadmap for when they are confronted with questions dealing with an older adult's mental capabilities and capacity. What are the right questions they should ask? What type of experts should they be consulting with? What type of experts should the parties be engaging in to make sure that they have the right information before making a decision that may impact an older adult, especially one that affects their autonomy. So again, that is one of the projects that is in our pipeline that we're working on, and we're quite excited about that because we hope that that will be able to help judges make better, more informed decisions. And so that is our whirlwind tour of the Elder Justice website. Again, we want to build tools and provide information that is of use to local communities and people like yourselves. To the extent that you can think of something that you think would be helpful to you and your community in working with older adults, please feel free to email me at the email address, and we can talk about it and see whether it makes sense for us to do it. Many of the things that I showed you today were grown out of community input. People said we needed a financial tool to help us do financial crimes. People said we needed videos. And so, again, we try to accommodate, and to the extent that we think it is scalable, we will invest the time and resources and work with you and others to help develop those tools. So again, I thank you for your time today. I wish you well, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me at the email address shown.